Hello, this is video 5. Um, Today I'm going to talk about functions and header files. Okay, the first thing I want to start with is describing a function. Okay, a function is just like we were learning about before with the main. It has a return type. As you see here, you'll always see this when a function starts with a data type. It will always have a return. It's because it's telling it that it has a return type when you declare this as int. When you don't have a data type, then the function would be void, and you would put void in here instead. It would be like this. Okay, but it is not a void function. It is an integer data type. You basically name it whatever you want. I decided to name this function add because this is what it does. It adds two numbers together. As you can see, I got two more variables that are going to be added together. Just I know there's other stuff here, just don't mind that for now. I'm going to get into that a little later here. Just concentrate on this one function. You got two numbers it's going to add together. Okay, basically what it does is, here's our main. Okay, this is where everything starts. Okay, it's going to come down here, and this is the chunk of the code that we're going to look at. First we're going to declare a total for 2. This is what we're going to use for now. We're going to initialize it to 0. Okay, and we're going to store whatever the function returns. So like I said, it returns a data type of int. You should notice that this is int too. Of course, they have to match. In order to get a return that is of int, you need a variable that can store int data. Okay, so you can have a string when you have a function that's returning an integer, unless you reformat, which is another story. Okay, okay, as soon as I guess I should first describe the prototype. Okay, when you first build a function, you need a prototype. And the reason for this is because in order for it to use a function, it has to know how it works. Okay, we can't just type this stuff in here and expect it to know what to do. It's got to know where it's supposed to go to do the function. So in order to do that, we build this prototype. Okay, and basically all it does is it identifies really just identifies the data types and how things are going to work. Like I was talking about before, it's going to identify the return, whether it has a return or not. It's going to give its function name, which, like I said, could be anything you want, just like a variable. Try and name it something that's going to have something to do with what you're doing. Keep it as clean as possible. And then you're going to have two variables that are actually being declared inside of the parameters, is what they call this. When it's inside parentheses inside of a function, it's called parameters. Okay, so we're declaring two different variables. We're declaring num1 and num2. Okay, so that's all we need to do. This is basically just like declaring a variable. We gotta tell it that it's there. And you notice this is always above the main. At least for now it is. When I get into headers, this will change. You won't see this above main. Okay, now we know how the prototype works. This is the declaration, just like declaring an integer, like the same as doing int new variable or new number or something like that, right? Equals 0. It's doing the same thing, except for now you have variables and stored inside of this declared type of data type, the best way to put it, and it's passing it to a specific place to do more code. Okay, so it's about the same thing. Okay, so when this function gets called, it's going to know that this should be a number and this should be a number of int type, and it's going to jump down and it's going to find the actual function, and it's going to return whatever is inside of these parameters. It's going to add them together and it's going to return it. When it gets returned, it comes back up here and it gets stored in total 2. Okay, so I think that's pretty understandable. Now I'm going to move on to overloading a function. Okay, now you've seen that all these other functions here have the same name. There's add, that's add, they're all the same name. Now before we knew that you usually don't name variables the same thing, because then you have problems, you have an ambiguous naming problem. Well, that's different when it comes to functions, at least in C++ it is. Okay, the object of overloading functions is to give new, just basically do new functionality using the same function. In this case, instead of adding 2 numbers, as this does in this, we're going to add 3 numbers, or 4 numbers, or 5 numbers together. Okay, and the way that this works is that when this function is called, it's going to check how many parameters it has. Okay, if it only has 2 parameters like this one does, then it knows to use this prototype. Okay, and same goes for this. If it has 3 parameters, then it's going to know that it needs to use this one. Okay, and it just keeps going down, and you could keep adding more. You know, you could put strings in, or variables in place of this, or in place of the whole numbers, or the constant values that you have here. Okay, so you can imagine how you could use it in different ways. Overloading comes in handy. Okay, and down here you'll see it, like the return would just be adding the extra number that the user passes in. Actually, I should say the user doesn't pass it in. I put constant values in it and ask for a user response. But yeah, it just takes whatever, it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and adds them together. So that's the values that it's going to have inside of these variables. Since really what this equals here is this here, and what this equals here is this here. I should say this function really, because this function here goes with this one, like I said before. Same with the prototypes. Each prototype has its own definition, and they always have this they always have the same name, and they always pass the same data type. So that way when it returns, it's always passing the same values. Okay, I think that's pretty good for learning the overloading and everything like that. It's pretty basic. Gonna move on to header files now. And the reason I decided to do header files and functions together is because you can use your header files to store your prototypes, as I was talking about before. You notice I actually have a function right here to get an average of a certain amount of numbers. Okay, that's what this function does here. Okay, what it does is, what you do is when you create your application, you would add your new item like you normally would. Create your C++ file main. I named this for, I actually did this for school, so I named this a certain name just for the instructor's sake. Okay, and then you come up here and you go in the header file folder, and you add a new header file instead. So there's a different file for adding headers. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to include a header. The thing with header files is you got to use the exact file name, including the extension .h. Okay, so when you would declare or include a header, you would do it from your main, like this here. You see how it's exactly the same as over here. I should say. So you can see over here in header files you add